Hi, I'm Erica from the Pancake Princess, and for this bake-off, we're in New York. So I am in New York doing a special edition bake-off of black and white cookies. So as you can see, I went to the park and handed out cookies to some tasters that are local to New York because they should know what black and white cookies actually taste like. I had never had one before coming on this trip. It's just not really a thing in Houston. But black and white cookies are basically a very soft and fluffy cookie. They're iced on the flat side of the cookie with black and white icing or chocolate and vanilla. They're very similar to cookies called Half Moons or German cookies called Americana. They are super delicious. They kind of remind me of Loft House cookies, but fluffier. So I really love them. I'm excited to walk you through all 9 recipes that we tried. This cookie is by Garten, and this is a super popular cookie. It's very similar to the recipe by Sally's Baking Addiction. This is the first of 3 recipes that use sour cream in the dough, so it's pretty standard butter, all-purpose flour, lots of vanilla. The chocolate frosting uses a little bit of espresso powder, which was unique, and semi-sweet melted chocolate. My friend described black and white cookies as a thin cupcake, and that is pretty accurate to the texture. It's very plush, very soft. I think the crumb is like super moist, especially on the first day. I really like the flavor of the vanilla frosting. There's some corn syrup in it, some heavy cream. I like that it doesn't crunch when you bite into it. It's kind of like a softer icing with good flavor. And then the chocolate icing, of course, is like a very flavorful chocolate because you have that melted chocolate in there. So overall, I think the base of this cookie is excellent. I think the frostings are both excellent. So winner of a black and white cookie for me. This recipe is by Of Batter and Dough. It is another sour cream recipe, but this one stood out because it also incorporates some shortening into the dough. It uses a little bit of corn syrup and some lemon extract, and it also uses unsweetened melted chocolate in the frosting. This cookie is also like amazing texture, very plush, very fluffy. I would say just as moist as Ina, but you get that lemon zing in the cookie, which is really nice. I don't prefer the vanilla frosting quite as much. I think it's because Ina's recipe has butter and heavy cream in the frosting, which gives it like a little more of a robust flavor, whereas this feels like more just a straight vanilla glaze. But I think the chocolate frosting is really great. So that unsweetened chocolate really gives like a rich, deep flavor to the frosting. So overall, if you like lemon and you like a really strong chocolate frosting, it's a great cookie. This recipe is by Melissa Clark at the New York Times, and Melissa went on an incredible bender to try to develop the perfect black and white cookie recipe. So this recipe stood out because it is another sour cream recipe that adds milk to the batter in addition to the sour cream, also uses a little bit of lemon zest and some almond extract. In the frosting, she uses both cocoa powder and melted chocolate, I believe. So this batter was extremely loose, and I would say it makes for the cakiest of the cookies so far of all of the sour cream cookies. I love the texture of the frosting. It is very soft. I think the corn syrup across the board makes for like a very soft and almost chewy frosting. And so I think the flavor of this frosting is really good. I would say I might give this like a tiny edge over Ina's recipe, even though I love the Ina cookie. This one is just like even more cakey. This recipe is by Epicurious. This is one of 3 recipes that uses buttermilk in the batter, and it is one of the only recipes that only uses cocoa powder in the frosting. So to me, this cookie is even fluffier than the sour cream varieties. So you get like a really airy, just like great fluff to the cookie. It's still pretty moist and very tender. So love the cookie base. The frosting did not look the most appealing to me because it's such a thin glaze, but there's some lemon juice in there, which gives it really nice flavor without it being in the cookie itself. And then the chocolate frosting, even though it only uses cocoa powder, has like a really great chocolate flavor. So overall, loved the frostings on this, loved the cookie. I mean, I think I just love all black and white cookies, but I thought this one was especially good if you're looking for a very fluffy cookie with like a little bit of a lemony hint in the vanilla frosting. This recipe is by Baked, and it is another buttermilk recipe, but it adds an extra egg yolk for richness and some lemon zest in the cookie itself. And then for the chocolate frosting, it is a cocoa-based frosting with cream, and this is one of the only recipes that does not use corn syrup in the frosting. So another buttermilk cookie, another very fluffy cookie. So if you like fluffier, airy, kind of like very cakey cookies, I would go for a buttermilk-based recipe versus sour cream. The recipes seem to be just a little bit denser in terms of the crumb. This recipe, I tasted it side by side with a batter and dough, and I personally prefer using the lemon zest in the dough versus lemon extract. I think the flavor comes across as a little more natural, but it's still very subtle. I also thought the chocolate flavor of this cocoa frosting was really good. It comes across like pretty intensely, but the frosting does crack a little bit more than other frostings, and I kind of like the texture that's a little softer that incorporates corn syrup. So overall, love the cookie base, would probably pair it with a softer corn syrup based frosting. This recipe is from New York Cult Recipes. It is pretty similar to Epicurious, but it has a slightly higher egg content and uses lemon zest in the cookie itself. It's another recipe that doesn't use corn syrup in the frosting, but it uses melted dark chocolate with cream for the chocolate frosting. So with the higher egg content in this cookie, you can feel that the crumb is like a little bit heavier, a little bit eggier than other recipes. So overall, not my favorite cookie base, just because I like it a little bit fluffier and airier. But the frostings I thought were pretty good, even though there's no corn syrup. The little bit of butter and a little bit of cream in the frosting keeps it nice and soft. So it kind of crackles a little bit versus the corn syrup frostings that are pretty smooth and pliable. But like the frostings, probably wouldn't make the cake base again. This recipe is by King Arthur, and this is the start of the recipes that use milk in the batter. So this recipe basically uses a little bit of lemon zest, otherwise pretty standard. The frosting uses corn syrup and melted semi-sweet chocolate. King Arthur had one of the thickest doughs, which translates into a very thick cookie. So this is one of the fattest in terms of like the width of the cookie. It's very fluffy. It's slightly drier compared to some of the other cookies, but still very cakey. I think personally I prefer like the very light airiness of like a buttermilk based cookie versus just this milk based cookie. The frosting is actually a little bit more firm than some of the others, even though it has corn syrup, and I think that's because this uses melted chocolate. But I think the flavors of the frostings are really good. If you like a really thick and like robust cakey cookie, I would try King Arthur. This recipe is by America's Test Kitchen. It is another milk-based recipe, so very similar to King Arthur, except that it uses all cake flour instead of all-purpose flour. It also uses a little bit of lemon extract. It uses fewer eggs and less leavening, so it's much thinner than King Arthur. And the frosting uses corn syrup and unsweetened chocolate. So what was interesting to me about this cookie is how different it is from King Arthur, even though the recipes are fairly similar. So the extra egg in the King Arthur cookie, and I think the extra leavening and the all-purpose flour all contribute to a much thicker cookie. You can see how thin the America's Test Kitchen is, and that leads to kind of a very like delicate but dense and like kind of chewy, like toothsome crumb, whereas King Arthur is much more fluffy but a little bit more bready, I would say. But the thing that really bothered me the most about this America's Test Kitchen cookie is the frosting tastes like pure sugar. It's basically water, powdered sugar, and corn syrup with a little bit of vanilla for the white frosting. The chocolate frosting is fine to me, like it's a pretty good chocolate frosting, but the white frosting is so sugary that it's very distracting for the rest of the cookie. So probably wouldn't make that again. But if you like a very thin, kind of like toothsome cookie, America's Test Kitchen could be a great option. This recipe is by Junior. This is the only recipe that uses heavy cream in the dough versus any other kind of dairy. It uses a combination of all-purpose flour and cake flour, and it uses bittersweet chocolate, lemon juice, and corn syrup in the frosting. Despite the high fat content in this cookie between the butter and the heavy cream, I found that this cookie was actually on the drier side. So you can kind of see it is a thinner crumb, so I would say it leans more cookie than cakey and super fluffy like some of the buttermilk based cookies. But yeah, it's just a little bit denser, a little bit breadier, a little bit drier than some of the other ones. I found the frosting to be very sweet and sugary and a little bit distracting. I couldn't get much of lemon flavor coming from the cookies. So overall, I would say it's a decent cookie, but not my favorite. Okay, in terms of my favorite black and white cookie, I think that the honor has to go to New York Times. It's a beautiful, super fluffy, super cakey, yet still moist cookie. I just love the texture. I would say New York Cult is a close second in terms of texture. But I also really loved Garten all around with the combination of a slightly thinner cookie with just like a great chocolate and vanilla icing. But in terms of like my overall ideal cookie, I think I would use the New York Times recipe, possibly with the Epicurious vanilla frosting, because I really like that lemon in the vanilla frosting, and then maybe combined with the chocolate frosting from Junior's cookie. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this recap of all 9 black and white cookie recipes. Let me know in the comments what bake-off you'd like to see next. I really love doing this regional bake-off in New York, so if you have a recommendation in your city, let me know what city I should come to next. For the full data analysis, you can visit my blog at The Pancake Princess or Instagram at thepancakeprincess.com. Oh my god, why? I'm upset.